complex narratives of being taken by alien beings into UFOs on beams of light.
The Air Force is trying to cover up with a picture of Venus and the moon.
From my own point of view, I'm going to be very disappointed if UFOs turn out to be nothing more than visitors from another planet, because I think there could be something much more interesting.
I'm not telling you that. The United States government is telling you that.
Welcome back, guys. I hope everyone is doing well. Oof, what a week we've had. This is my first show since everything's gone crazy in the subject. Boy, oh boy. But obviously it became clear that David Grush was talking about this 1933 Italy crash. So I thought, we'll go over kind of what's been said about this in the past. And I've spent the last couple of days looking into it, and there's so much conflicting information out there. I've found this a lot more difficult than I thought. So we've got two good friends joining me today to kind of go over this. Before I bring them on, though, as always, please keep the chat nice and respectful. I'd appreciate that. All my shows now are actually going to go over to Patreon as audio only as well, for sort of giving back to Patreon. And I've lowered that right down to $1 as well. So if you wanted them audio only, you can get them on Patreon for $1. And it just helps support what we do here. Other than that, guys, if you have any questions, pop them in capital letters in the chat so I get a better chance of seeing them. And let's get into it. Let's bring in my guests. First up, my good friend, Sean Rash of Witness Citizen. Sean, how are you?
Good. How are you, sir?
I'm not too bad. Not too bad. Been a very busy week, but yeah.
Good. You have this whole case solved, figured out. You're ready to...
In the bag.
Yeah, okay.
Please also welcome my good friend and colleague at UAP Media UK, Mr. Graham Rendell. Graham, how are you?
Hello, Vinny. Hello, Sean. How are you both doing?
Good.
Yeah, not bad, not bad. This case has been turning my brain to mush the last couple of days.
You and me both.
It's unbelievable. So yeah, let's sort of ask both of you, what did you guys know about this case before before it came back into the news recently?
Graham, you want to?
It goes a long way back. Tim Good wrote about RS-33 back in the late 80s or early 90s. I can't remember off the top of my head which book it's in, but it's definitely one of them. So yeah, he talked about it quite early on, I guess.
Sean?
This is one that was always kind of like in the back of my head as far as it's something I want to get to. I know Christopher Sharp at Liberation Times released something. I know Lou has mentioned it, and it's kind of been floating around. But, it's one of those where I also felt like I didn't have the resources I needed to successfully investigate it. Like I can't find much of anything other than what's already available. And so it just kind of feels stuck at some point. And you're right. It's like, how do you verify anything at this point too? So I always kind of got stuck against a wall, but here we are looking at it, man. So
yeah.
You just never know.
No, absolutely. And like I said, in the last couple of days, I've been trying to dig deep into it, and there is a lot of conflicting information out there on a lot of the sort of major points of the story. There are some good Italian articles, which I'm going to be working off today, going through the story. It doesn't seem as biased. There seems to be two sides or two factions. One that believes this is, true. Others where there's a lot of questions being asked, and there doesn't seem to be much middle ground. So that's what I really struggled with, is trying not to come from one angle. So the best thing to do is just give a really brief outline of what apparently occurred. A lot of this, I think, is I'm not going to say I believe it at all. It's too difficult, but I'm just going to start reading. In fact, I'm going to share my screen and do it that way. And then we can go chapter by chapter, not chapter, paragraph by paragraph on this. So on the morning of June 13th, 1933, an unidentified flying object appeared in the clouds covering the skies of Lombardy. Can I just caveat? This is translated from Italian, so the wording might be a little bit out. The aircraft landed shortly after, possibly crashing near the municipality of Vergiate in the province of Varese. The security organs immediately activated. The remains of the mysterious aircraft were hurriedly transported to a nearby SIAI Marchetti plant, and the bodies of 2 deceased pilots, tall, blonde, with blue eyes, which everyone, associates that with the Nordic beings. But, this is all I could really find about the pilots across all of the documentation. It's 1.8 meters, 2 of them tall, fair hair, and the eyes. That's it. That's all I could find. Apparently preserved in formalin, but I think it means formaldehyde. Benito Mussolini, informed of the facts, was at first convinced that it was a foreign prototype, and I think he believed it was French or German. Unauthorized flight over Italian skies, and ordered that the incident be kept in the strictest secrecy. In the days following the event, the mystery became more intense. The mysterious aircraft had not yet been identified and could have been of extraterrestrial origin. Now, that part, so initially Mussolini thought it was just a foreign aircraft, and I think it was Marconi was the one that went, no, I think this is extraterrestrial. So, Graham, what do you think about that, about some kind of aircraft in 1933 coming from France or Germany that that fits those kind of strange,
well,
prototypes?
Based on what they talk about, I mean, aircraft back then, so you're looking at 1933, they were still like flying biplanes, basically. It was right at the end of the kind of, the prototypes of new airplanes, new fighter airplanes, so high performance for those days, were still biplanes. There were a few monoplanes coming onto the scene, but they were still largely mucking about with biplanes because that was still considered to be the sort of pinnacle of technology. And engine development hadn't really got much better since the First World War. So you're not looking at very, very high performance airplanes. However, your top speed is around about 200 miles an hour for that, maybe 250, 260 miles an hour for that period of time. So nothing here matches, particularly what the French or even the Germans were mucking about with in 1933, or even the Italians might have had on their books, or anybody else for that matter, matches this kind of shape and performance and all the rest of it, let alone Nordics and everything else. When I first heard this, and I caught wind of some of these details a long time ago, my thinking was, where does this information come from? Where can we see, how it was reported to Mussolini? Where are the documents? Where is the paper trail? Because you could make a claim like that first paragraph about almost anything and just present it as fact, and it's a lovely story. But where's the truth of it? What lies behind it? And that's not me trying to debunk this case. It's just a standard kind of kind of procedure that you would use to verify any kind of claim, any story. So that's what I would love to see. I want to see that before really you should comment any further about how true this is, because again, up until that point, it's a claim. And it's making some fairly bold claims as well, that Mussolini, was informed of what happened, and that there were bodies on board, and that the SIAI Marchetti factory, because that's how you mentioned that, it was actually a well-known aviation concern back then, that the craft, alleged craft rather, was stored in those hangars, and apparently even stayed there until it was spirited away in 1944, 1945 or something. So it was there for quite a long time. So there's quite a few elements to even just that first part of the story that do require some kind of independent corroboration so we can move forward.
Yeah. So it's not like Vril Society secret tech from the 30s.
You know how to push my buttons, mate, don't you?
I do.
I think I heard it was actually a Horton Brothers.
Shush. You don't start either.
So let's jump. I'm going to jump around a bit because I want to come to the point where these letters and telegrams come into play. So I'm going to share my screen back to that article, because we'll show the these as well. So the documents and sources of Mr. X. So during a ufological symposium organized in San Marino in 2000, Roberto Pinotti, writer, ufologist, and founder in 1967 of the National Ufological Center, revealed that in 1996 he had received some official documents which suggested the existence of fascist archives on UFOs. The first envelope contained 2 letters on Senate letterhead and 3 telegrams. The 2 letters were the confirmation of the sending of a highly confidential personal note and a note giving instructions on how to manage events following the discovery of Vergiate or Vergiate. I don't know how to pronounce these Italian things. So what I'll do is let me bring up these letters. This is the first one where it does mention here Gabinetto RS-33, so the RS-33 cabinet, this kind of MJ-12 style Italian group of scientists tasked with looking into this. So we can see that with the Senate head here. And then this is the list on how to, and what did he say? How to deal with, let's have a look. Excuse me a second. How to manage events following the discovery. It's in this document that we find for the first time a reference to RS-33, and then the 3 telegrams testify to the agitated communications between the government apparatuses during the day of June 13, 1933. And if we look at the telegrams, this one here shows all 3, and this is said to have been color photocopies of the originals. And then if I go back, these are kind of breakdowns of what they say. But the thing is, it doesn't say much about kind of a UFO or anything like that. There's a aircraft of unknown nature, which still kind of is a bit vague to me. And it's just saying, you know, don't talk about it. And this is all coming from Mussolini. It's pretty much the same across all 3. Treat the news. It's all translated, so it's
and
very
also,
difficult
bearing in mind
to
at the
understand.
time, there was also a flap in terms of like unknown airplanes. All through the 20s and in the 1930s, there was what they called the ghost airplanes. You know, you heard of the ghost rockets from 1946. Well, actually, there was this other phenomenon that happened back then. So there was mystery aircraft flying around, or at least that's what they were reported as. You know, John Keel has written about this kind of stuff. Other people have written about it as well in the past. That these aircraft were seen flying and showing spotlights down to the ground, and they were seen in all different types of weather. They were seen in weather conditions where no self-respecting pilot at that time would fly a fairly flimsy aeroplane, because that's what they were back then. So, you know, you've got this other dimension to this story where it lends a bit of credibility to it, but at the same time, as you said there, Vinny, there's not enough there to actually definitely state that this was something, you know, that we maybe should be interested in. Again, they're coming down as mystery aircraft or mystery airships. You know, there's all this kind of wording. It might just be down to the time, but also you have to start wondering, you know, is it really or is it not? So yeah, there's a bit of ambiguity there, isn't there, in the language?
I find the whole idea of, what is it, RS-33? I find the whole idea of RS-33 in it kind of being an MJ-12 thing, except an Italian version. I find that extremely interesting, because what you know, the idea that plays out and what it suggests is that the secrecy may have, you know, if this case in fact is true and these are true, it implies that secrecy started before the United States and in Italy, and that we took it from them pretty much, you know, and it would kind of set a record straight, which is interestingly enough was kind of discussed in that original article of one of the other people who spoke up about the misnomer that the United States was just you know, in charge of all the secrecy and everything. This would kind of, you know, blow that out of the park, so to speak, if it turned out that could be proven and true.
The one thing I would ask Vinny would be, you know, it's called RS-33, Cabinet RS-33 for a reason. Would there be any other, like, you know, instances where they set up similar kind of cabinets, you know, or groups or whatever for other reasons? Can people point to RS-32 or RS-31 or something similar, so you've got an idea that this wasn't just like a one-off? Is there a kind of like a precedent for this, you know, for setting up things like this for kind of strange events, or for other situations where they felt even just something mundane, but they needed to set up a special commission or something like that to investigate something. And therefore, this was a kind of methodology that they used to actually identify a special group, or maybe even a secret group, because that would actually then lend credibility to this as well. If you could show, something previous that actually went, yeah, okay, they've done this before for something else, they're now doing it for this. Or is this something that somebody's just plucked out of their head somewhere, like maybe MJ12, because, you know that I don't necessarily believe in MJ12. So I'm a bit kind of, it's one of these things that I'd love to be true, but I'm just, I just can't get there.
Isn't that like the big question in ufology for almost like every kind of case or whatever? Even then, David, this recent whistleblower, a lot of people are saying the same very thing. Like I wish I could say I think this would be true, but I can't. And that's that's a natural thing to say, right? If you're about to have your paradigm shift, like you're gonna hold on to. It's like being in a tornado. You're going to hold on to that light pole for dear life until it rips you off. And now you're just in ET land, there's nothing you can do. So it's pretty interesting.
Yeah. But when it comes to RS-33, the story goes that it was RS-33 because of 1933. And it's said that the group disbanded in 1940 at the, almost at the start of World War II, that they had investigated other cases in the decade prior, 1931 incident, 1933 and 1936. So, it all sounds viable.
Oh, it sounds plausible. It does. The whole story's always sounded plausible to a point.
Exactly.
But then again, the best cases always do, and even some of the hoaxes that we all know and love do as well. So I think it's one of these ones where we do need more information about a lot of this to be able, and from other sources, some corroboration, and that would go a long way to actually verifying what's being said here. Otherwise, it just becomes another claim, albeit a really interesting one, because I'm not prepared to say, although I'm not going to say this never existed, because I can't, but neither can I also sort of hand on heart say, there's definitely something to it.
Yeah, and I think that Mr. X does provide at some point in this story, he provides names of some of these scientists.
He does.
Supposedly make up the group, but that doesn't prove it either, because the people in MJ12 were all real people.
Exactly.
But it doesn't prove that MJ12 was a real thing. So.
And for the same amount of time, but in Nazi Germany, there was always a saying, a lie is best hidden between two truths. So this is the kind of thing that people did back then as well, and obviously they still do now. So you have to also treat things with a pinch of salt, I'm afraid.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's jump back into the article. So it goes on here. Mussolini authorized the investigations to be conducted by the RS-33 Cabinet of the OVRA, the Opera Vigilanza Repressione Antifascismo, the secret police of fascist Italy. The files relating to the research conducted by the RS-33 Cabinet, coordinated, I'm not even going to try his first name, coordinated by Marconi, would later be accessible to the authorities of Nazi Germany as well. Based on those documents, the development of the Wunderwaffen, which I guess is the wonder weapons of Germany, began. Experimental secret weapons, including the V7, the aircraft very similar to a flying saucer, and Die Glocke, a bell-shaped armored device that moved suspended in the air. Let's just stop it there, because I want to talk about this point, because a lot of people have been saying that this crashed craft in 33 is Die Glocke. And I mean, there are so many things that don't point to that. The Die Glocke was supposedly 3.7 meters. This object, according to David Grush, was 10 meters. That's a vast difference for a start. Die Glocke was, surely that was produced, made, worked on in the 40s. I mean, I'm sure you've got a lot to say about this, Graham.
Oh, God. Right. Die Glocke still hasn't been proven. It's based, as far as I'm aware, on the writings of one Igor Witowski, who's a Pole, but also he, from what I understand, he alleges that the information about Die Glocke comes from Polish intelligence interrogations of one Jakob Sperrenberg after the war. Jakob Sperrenberg was an SS officer. He was what they called a higher police leader, so he was basically in charge of a fairly large part of Poland. But at the end, like in November 1944, he was shipped off to Norway to look after things there on behalf of the SS. So he wasn't really around at the end of the war when, or the last 6 months of the war when all this stuff with the Glocker was supposed to be going on. And, the fact that that either might have spirited away from there or it was buried when they blew the facility up, and all these other stories that have circulated around the Bell, that's Die Glockers, that's the English translation. Witkowski, as far as I'm aware as well, wrote some rather, let's put this in air quotes, dodgy books about Wunderwaffen, I think beforehand as well. And whilst I've seen bits of them, they sometimes make some maybe possibly wild claims as well. So it's always been something where it's one of those where it's be a love to have kind of story, to be true. But Nick Cook looked at it years ago, The Hunt for Zero Point. There was a Channel 4 documentary where he visited the Henge with Witkowski. It could equally be a cooling tower base. There was nothing to suggest, just because it looks like something that you can describe, oh yeah, that's definitely something to do with a central point for this thing to sit in and bounce up and down because it's like powered by anti-gravity or something. No, there's no documentation about it at all. Anything that you see on the internet is probably forged. The stories don't add up. There's no independent corroboration of anything to do with this particular device. It came out of nowhere, in about the 1990s. It's like the Nazi UFOs. You go back far enough in history and you hit a brick wall in terms of people talking about it. So from that alone, you can sort of think this is where this really started. So I would treat all kind of references to the Bell and any links with the Bell and whatever we're talking about here, if that's true, with a huge, not just a pinch of salt, but a bloody sackful.
Yeah. And what about these V7s? Because that seems to come up an awful lot.
Oh, God.
I know.
Yeah. So where was the V4, V5, V6 as well? This is the way it works. No, it's a figment of imagination. Again, the V7 is something, yes, somebody called Herman of Berth, who was like a kind of rocket engineer, and somebody who was quite respected, talked about it in the 50s and said, yeah, it definitely existed. He's quoted in Flying Saucer Review, the magazine in the 1950s, saying that there was an article about him that he wrote mentioning the V7 in there. That doesn't mean to say it's true though. And again, it's one of these things where there is no evidence, there is no documentation, nothing that doesn't look really suspect to say that the V7 existed. It probably, and people should read UFOs Before Roswell if they want a breakdown of things like that and all the other rubbish that has been talked about, Nazi UFOs and dish-shaped craft that the Germans built. It's based on, effectively, it boils down to a whole load of people claiming to be various engineers of one stripe or another, talking to newspapers in the 1950s, either to try and gain publicity for things that they were working on or trying to push then. So another one who had a fireworks company, would you believe, and in the shapes of V2s for kids, and he was trying to push that, and he was trying to claim that he'd been part of the German secret weapons program during the war. Somebody who allegedly worked on an Egyptian missile system, who claimed he worked on them as well. Another one who nobody's ever been able to work out who he was, let alone any documentation about him. And somebody else who ends up in CIA and FBI documents because he's translations of foreign newspaper reports. And that's supposed to be truth. You go far enough backwards, you get to 1950, and there's no mention of before that. There is no documentation, no mention of it in anywhere before that date. That's when they start talking about these things. So you wonder why can't you find any reference to them beforehand? It's because that's when they started talking about it. That's when they made this stuff up. And that's where the whole kind of, mythos about Nazi UFOs started. It was never in the war. They didn't have that technology.
There's other things that are pretty interesting about this case too, that, it actually, like the lore or the kind of flying saucer, I guess, before flying saucers existed, or the conspiracies were the death ray, and we see that mentioned within this article or this piece too, which I find pretty interesting, because if you look back in the newspapers, you can see it goes from death ray to flying saucers, you know, and there are actually people talking about successfully making a death ray, whether it be one guy I think successfully took down like pigeons, he said, or something. Actually, this one Northrop engineer said that that engineers took their ideas from science fiction, and look what's happening with the radar. We're going to have a death ray soon. So people, you know, I don't know. So that's pretty interesting too. And then
radar came out of death rays.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, because they were looking for a death ray. They were trying to build a death ray in the 30s, and that's where radar came out of.
Right,
because they couldn't get a death ray, but they could get radar.
So I just noticed some other kind of familiar lore, and it was around that time too when the death ray was in the newspapers, wasn't it, Grant? I think it was around like the 30s.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, they were talking about it quite a lot back then.
Interesting.
Yeah,
and I think this
give it some authenticity, I guess.
But then we have these stories and wild stories about the Vril Society, and that they were in communication with a Nordic extraterrestrial race who then gave them the technology that allowed the Germans to create UFOs, and then they went to Antarctica, and you know, all of this, and people put all this together to paint a picture of truth, and of course there is no truth to it at all, and it just muddies the waters, and really I just really struggle with it, and I hate talking about it.
Here's something really controversial. If you want to discredit somebody, give them a load of information and insert stuff like this into it.
Sure.
And then it just wipes them out, because people will not, you know, you can't take somebody seriously to a point if they're talking about stuff like that. You know, Nazi technology and all the rest of it, because it's just rubbish.
And if they had it, surely they would have won the war.
Damn right.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of an
you would have found it somewhere. There'd be bits of them in museums by now. People would be talking about it. You know, there's not a scrap of evidence, and the stuff that people purport to be evidence is secondhand. It's claims that have no foundation, or they're just faked photographs. There's nothing there.
What does that make you think of the whistleblower then, Graham? Because you seem like passionately against this case, and he's coming out saying,
"Don't get me wrong. I need to have more information about the RS-33 thing before I'm going to come down on one side or the other. Just little bits of it don't add up, but that doesn't mean to say the whole thing doesn't. Because if you're going to run a disinformation campaign about something, you know, you always throw bits in the mix that make people think, oh, well, there's nothing to this, or that's suspect. But that doesn't mean to say other bits of it aren't true. So, you know, we still have to step back and go, we still need more information. And that's how I always work with everything. You know, I'm not going to come down on one side or the other. That's why I don't even say, you know, what we're looking at full stop about, you know, what we're all investigating, because I don't know. I just don't have enough information. But the whole Nazi UFO tech stuff that is part of this story, and Robert Pinotti, you know, he actually does go on to this a bit later on about the German, you know, he does mention them by name. If you start throwing that into the mix and saying, because he does actually mention in an article he wrote for Phenomenon magazine as well, which I've got, that's about RS-33. He mentions the kind of Nazi UFO technology as being essentially true. But it's not really, you know. So
I mean, that could have even been made up to, you know, all we're left to do is like fill in the blanks and speculate, and that's partially why these stories kind of come together the way they do. But like the more imaginative storyteller kind of gets remembered for that, right?
Yeah.
He says in the Phenomenon article, you know, Pinotti says that it's also possible that the German V7 brackets a revolutionary disc-shaped aircraft whose existence as a prototype was confirmed by Hermann Oberth.
He spoke out about UFOs.
Italian research, you know, so there's a bit of a leap there, but also, you know, nobody's confirmed that the V7 existed. It's just somebody said it did. You know, who apparently, you know, who was quite well respected, but that doesn't mean to say that everything he said was true. You know, so and V7, you know, you're not going to get anywhere if you try to research that, because you are going to hit a brick wall very quickly. Try to actually research it and prove it.
Yeah. Well, let's jump back into the article and go from there. So, according to this narrative, the political history of ufology, contacts with aliens kept hidden from the population by a precise government, would begin with the discovery of Verge 8. 14 years before the flying saucer crashed in Roswell, New Mexico. The RS-33 cabinet, some speculate the RS is the acronym for Special Research, would have operated in the buildings of La Sapienza University of Rome and liaised with the leading figures of the regime. The cabinet, whose meetings were attended by senators and scientists, was the fascist version of Majestic 12, the secret US organization that was allegedly formed in 1947 to investigate Roswell. The curious Italian story thus described is based on a series of documents, some originals, other copies, sent by post starting in 96 from an anonymous source. Yeah, we've kind of gone over that. The doubts of the skeptics, and this is an important point, the doubts of the skeptics are concentrated precisely on the documentation that emerged after more than 50 years. And during the research that I've been doing in the last couple of days, I've seen arguments on both sides, arguments where these documents have been analyzed and claimed to have been proven to be real, but then others saying there are so many missing pieces of information that take away from the authenticity of what would have been written at the time, how it would have been written, how it would have been sent, and all many things like that. And this goes into the sources and the documents.
Because they got somebody called Antonio Garavaglia to actually use this allegedly. Well, I don't know how. Again, I don't know a huge amount of detail about the case in terms of what his professional kind of qualifications were, but he allegedly did a professional forensic analysis into the documents, and apparently there were chemical tests of the paper and the ink, etc. He apparently had the originals, not copies, and he concluded that there were authentic handwritten documents from the fascist era. The color of the paper and the ink aging process led him to believe they were absolutely genuine and they weren't modern forgeries. What I would love to have is another analysis by somebody else.
Yeah.
Well, because the more, if you got 2 or say 3 different people, coming and having a look at it, and then you could probably then come up with a consensus. I'm not suggesting that the chap that they had do it was wrong or you didn't know what he was talking about, but it would be nice to have another one so you could compare them as well, because I think that's if there's nothing to hide here, you probably should throw some more kind of resources at it just to prove it beyond a shadow of a doubt that they are genuine, because that would be great, because that would move that forward and then you could you wouldn't have that doubt. But yeah, I would like to see that. Because that
And wouldn't you kind of expect like whoever owns the paperwork to do something like that too if they really wanted to know the truth, right? They would get multiple analysis.
Well, one group of Italian researchers apparently contacted the people that had the documents to say, can we get a look at them, and they just didn't hear back from them, and that's unfortunate, because that would have again like added more credence to it. But this is kind of what this paragraph I'm going to skip here is just talking about how Mr. X, there were other documents sent over the years between 96 and 2000, and it all comes down to the reliability of said documents. I'm just going to skip right here to the bottom where it says Nazi Germany did not have the time to exploit them, and thus this heritage ended up in the hands of the Allies. So it is said that in 1945, the materials, the documents, and this craft that was stored in Italy in this hangar was picked up by OSS, this a US agency, and taken back to the US. So Sean, have you come across OSS much in your research?
Yeah, well, OSS is a precursor to CIA, right? So CIA, like many other things, began in 1947, strangely enough, right? So they were just like the CIA. I haven't done a lot of research into them, but I know just about their existence and everything. But you can't find a lot of documentation on them online, which really stinks, because there's probably a lot of stuff there that could help in our UFO search in those OSS files, perhaps. And they're not there. And even like the start of them using like LSD and stuff, those would be in those files too. So it's too bad that they're not available, but that could be for a reason too.
Yeah.
That this case, just lately I've been going into cases that go back, to 1860, in the newspapers, written about mysterious lights, so, and even a crash, in the United States in like 1896. There's an article written about it. So this stuff happens, and I think maybe this story could be the first version of what our Roswell became, almost, where you have something really exciting. People know something exists, and you have one person who's recollecting truth. You have another person who doesn't want people to know the truth. And you have various things going out there in the public because of those, different factions. It seems like almost like could be the first version of that. Now, if it's because it was like the first blimp or because it was a flying saucer, like, how do we find that out? I don't know.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah.
I just wanted to highlight as well that John Greenwald at the Black Vault has some. I'm going to share my screen again for anybody that wants to go and dig into this. So again, it's about the flash UFO files. Oh, where's that? Colonel Corso was OSS in Italy. That's interesting. Wow, I didn't know that. But yeah, part of Roberto Pinotti's information is on the Black Vault, and this is from the book UFO Contacts in Italy, Volume 2, published by Philip Mantle's Flying Disc Press. And in that book, I wanted to highlight this. It's William Bill Brophy Jr. and Roberto Pinotti in the photograph. In 2009, Mr. William Bill Brophy Jr. contacted us, informing us that his late father, United States Air Force Lieutenant Colonel William Brophy Jr., had cooperated in the covered-up operations to recover crashed UFOs in the United States. Besides, he would have told his son that in 1945, after the defeat of the Germans in northern Italy. The Americans found and took to the States important material about an Italian UFO crash, including the corpses of the two pilots. I mean, that's pretty, interesting.
Loads of stuff.
Yeah. And then I'm just going to jump to the statement made this week by David Grush. So he was asked in La Parisienne, the French newspaper, by the reporter, can we know more about these ships were recovered, where these ships were recovered? One was recovered in Italy in 1933, which is the earliest case that I've been briefed on. I can't talk about the others, which I find strange why he's able to talk about this, but no others. But hey ho, hopefully we'll get that.
I heard because it was overseas or something.
Okay, possibly. I mean, maybe. Yeah. And then what allegedly happened there. So in 1933, a bell-like craft around 10 meters in size was recovered in Magenta, northern Italy. It was kept by Mussolini's government until 1944, where it was recovered by OSS. Ironically, it predates Roswell. So this is where it's interesting that he says it was kept by Mussolini's government until 44, assuming when OSS picked it up then. So this object didn't go to Germany, and I've seen this in some of the other research that I did in the last couple of days, where it was just the research documents from RS-33 that went to Germany, not an object that they could back engineer in Germany. So I found that really interesting. But you can see why it's a really messy case.
So what? What just kind of came to me. Yeah, what just kind of came to me was. In Roswell, it was such an interesting situation how they came out in the paper and said, they didn't just say we recovered an unknown device. They said the rumors are true. Flying saucers exist. We have one. And then came out, the next day or whatever and said, no, it was a kite. Wound up lying about that, getting caught about that too. So what I'm trying to get to is if there was a secret thing in process already at that point, like a retrieval process or whatever, when that came up, that would already be in place. So that mistake to me probably wouldn't have happened. So maybe, the thing at 47 crashes or whatever, those people who are dealing with it have no idea what's going on. The people who got the Mussolini UFO are like, hey, no, idiot, tell them it was a kite. Yeah, no, I'm just speculating, but that's the only fun thing I can do. When we don't have it.
So OSS agents recover it in 44, but then on the other hand, the Americans cover it in 45 after the German surrender in the north. Which one's right? Because quick history lesson for people. Italy surrendered in 1943, and the country was split into two halves. So you had what they call the co-belligerent forces, who basically cooperated with the Americans and the British in the south, and in the north it was called the Salo. Well, it actually wasn't called this, but it was more or less called the Salo Republic, and they were the fascists. And they had a kind of rump state, and they got most of their weapons from the Germans, because by then, the country was split into two, kind of thing, and they were dependent on the Germans for a lot of their aircraft, and a lot of stuff got spirited away as well, because obviously the Germans didn't want the Italians like surrendering and passing stuff back over to the Allies, so they were very kind of cagey as to what they let the Italians have. Plus, any kind of technology like this, if the Germans had got wind of it, they would have seized it from the Italians, so it wouldn't have been just paperwork, it would have been the craft, and probably the bodies as well would have been taken to Germany, if they'd heard that they had them, because the Italians were definitely the junior partner in the Axis.
It makes a lot more sense if it would have been delivered here in 1933 to me, for whatever reason. One of the things is, like I was telling you before the show, that finding some newspaper articles about how Mussolini and like 70 some planes flew from Italy to Chicago on the day of the crash, which, if you want to start putting pieces together, that could be a great idea to cover up you transporting a craft to the United States, and they owed a lot of money to the United States, apparently. So what if they said, I don't know, we can't pay it, but here's an alien spacecraft, so that kind of stuff, even though it's far-fetched, I can, at least speculate some dots there, where 1944, I feel like it becomes more complicated. But
yeah, absolutely.
In the early 1930s, again, just for a little historical perspective, the Italian Air Force was possibly one of the best in Europe at that particular time, in terms of how professional the pilots were, how good their aircraft were, and they did a lot of these kind of big aerial events back then.
Right.
They had this bit, they would get a big group of aircraft and have them fly in formation. It was called a Balboa. It's still called a Balboa now, and it was named after the Italian Air Force general of the time, who was quite a famous general, Balboa, and that's what they call them. So they were quite air-minded. They were quite good at setting up an air force, and it was quite a good air force back then. So there's all various reasons why they might have sent aircraft across to America, because obviously that's what they did, and also North Africa and Ethiopia, they were getting involved in that part of the world as well, and air travel and air transport and military air arm kind of side of things was a big thing then. So I wouldn't necessarily read too much into the fact that they flew there the same day, but you're right, you can't rule it out as well.
Well, it's just weird timing.
It is, yeah.
If you were going to cover something up, you'd be like, well, let's use this.
Do happen as well.
Let's do this. Well, it's like to the point where we have this whistleblower coming out, right? And he has plenty of people backing him up, plenty of people who are, well qualified and everything.
Oh yeah.
And I'm assuming more people are going to come forward too. And this person is saying on the record that this crash happened. So if we don't know all the facts, which we don't, which is common in ufology, right? Like all we can do is try to connect the dots, I guess, right?
Oh, of course.
Well,
that's what we do anyway, isn't it? But if you wanted to discredit somebody coming out with some information, you would give them, you give them the truth, but you'd also put some other stuff in it as well. So when they come out with it all as a whole, some of it might not look right or end up being proven to be incorrect, and then that basically taints everything else that's said around it. So also somebody does have to wonder how much of this is actually true, this particular section. That doesn't mean to say everything else he's saying should be suspect, and also vice versa as well. So it's, I don't know, about I'm a bit like you.
We'll see what happens Sunday.
I've heard other bits. I've read bits of this, and some of it doesn't make sense. Some of it's a bit conflicting. And I'll just one more thing, if you don't mind. There's actually, for this article that Pinotti wrote for Phenomenon, he talks about a German engineer or a designer called Nordung. He says, besides, since the end of the 30s, a German aircraft designer named Nordung had been trying to build a solar flying disc to be sent out to space, subsequently renamed the Flying Wheel. Well, actually, this Nordung, it was actually a pseudonym for somebody called Hermann Potochnik, and he died in 1929. He was an aircraft designer, from Austria-Hungary. So he wasn't even around when theoretically he was supposed to be designing this thing. He did actually design something called the Flying Wheel. It was a space station, effectively. But so there's a few details there which are a bit out as well. I'm not going to say that that all this is a lie, because I can't. But
we always have this
to
instinct.
up,
It's like everyone has this instinct to take all this stuff and attach it to man-made all the time, right? Because they're trying to avoid that paradigm shift breakage almost, and I'm not saying they're trying to, but maybe subconsciously or as a way to avoid it or whatever. But it's also true that throughout history, so many different people have created flying saucers or have tried to.
Oh yeah, definitely.
So again, there's this mix of, well, a lot of people have tried it, so maybe, but then there's no proof. The best thing we found was a broken down UFO with rotor blades in Maryland in 1950, right, Graham, or whatever year that was.
I've just
there's
read in the
pictures of it,
comments-
but people have tried to do that forever too. So
I've just read
humans are good.
Somebody's just written Die Glocke Wunderwaffe. So the stories and rumors of the Nazi bell might be true. That. Amazing. Oh no.
Yeah, I was like, I hope.
Sorry,
Graham
Firefly, but no, we've done that.
Yeah.
But this stuff you can track to the beginning too, like the jet engine. There are records going back to the beginning of how it was designed.
And the Italians had their own jet aircraft in 1940.
Yeah.
It was called the N1. But it wasn't a jet aircraft in the true sense of the word, because it had a piston engine in it as well to drive the compressor, so to squirt the jet fuel into to ignite it to set it going. It was a dead end technology, and it was much slower than the contemporary aircraft of the period anyway, the ones that weren't jet powered. So if they had this wonderful technology on literally falling into their laps, why didn't the Italians do something with it? Because they weren't bad engineers. They had some really good aircraft in World War II.
Everything started out in Western France too.
Why didn't more happen with it? Especially if they'd got it in 1933, or something like that, they had a head start on everybody in Europe. They had a head start on the Germans, had a head start on the French, on the Russians and the Brits. Why didn't they do more with it? Why weren't they taking it apart and trying to reverse engineering it, like people say that the Germans did, with other things?
Right.
So
it
doesn't add up either.
Reverse engineering alien spacecraft, and they lost.
Well, you've heard the stories about the Germans and Aldebaran, haven't you? So those stories have kicked around for years, and that also makes my eyes roll. So
yeah, I think one thing I'd like to do is just encourage people, if they're genuinely interested in this case, is to go and do what I did for the last couple of days, and go and research it. I'm just going to show you something, because there's so much information out there, but so much of it is in Italian. And this, for example, is just nicely laid out with pop-ups, but it's got all this information in it. But I mean, I didn't have time to translate it, but
oh, come on, dude.
Maybe there is just
yesterday.
There's a lot of information on the Wayback Machine as well that I came across, and the thing is, you have to trawl through it, because there's a lot of nonsense in there, and it's if anyone does this, you'll see why it's a very, very messy case. But if anybody does do any work on this and finds any little gems or anything, please feel free to send it to me. My email address is everywhere. You can find it easily. It's in the description or the about section here on YouTube. And let's keep looking into it. I'm hoping that on Sunday, when we get this interview with David Grush, that maybe we get more information. It might just be his word, because it's not like we're suddenly going to get the evidence and the documentation presented to us publicly. Hopefully one day we get that as part of this process. So I guess, guys, before we finish up, what are your guys' thoughts on how this has played out in the last week, and what are you hoping?
Well, let me share a moment I had today with you that kind of sums up how I feel about everything right now. And it's a simple moment, but it really hit me deep. So I'm driving in my car, and when I'm not listening to a UFO podcast or something like that, I listen to the local radio, the local sports radio, because I do like my sports team. So I turn it onto there, and there's the local personalities talking about this story on the local sports channel. Right. And the one guy's going but it could be the end of the world. This Homer guy's super loud, and, that's his personality. And the other guy's like, No, it ain't. Why? And I'm just listening to like two regular people who don't think about this nearly, as much as we do, getting hit with this news and talking about it on the radio and how that plays out. And it just hit me like, this went really freaking big, man. And it has a lot of potential because it's reaching people that I would have never thought it would reach. And it makes me think like, whatever happens with this, it gives me a little more, for better or for worse, purpose that I'm here. Like, remember, I'm here because I saw something that was crazy, not nearly as crazy as a lot of what other people describe, but for me, it was shocking. And because of that, I'm here doing this at this point in time right now when everybody, has gotten news that aliens and craft may very well exist and that may not be a conspiracy theory. And I just find it so amazing, so like the truth of the matter, if like somebody's makes up this lie to cover up this or that or whatever, like we're at we're at the boiling point of finding out whatever the truth of the matter is. Like, so if you're someone who thinks this is a conspiracy and you think this is all BS, well, guess what? Like, we're at the tipping point of finding that kind of thing out. So like, why don't you help us push for transparency to figure this out once and for all so we can be done with it? Prove that you don't want to argue for the rest of your life about blurry videos. Like, let's get to the bottom of this. And we've never been closer, and you cannot get past the guy's credentials and the credentials of the people that have spoken, out on his behalf. Like, you can't get past that. And I know it's tough, but it's real, so whatever the reason is why we're here right now, we're here, and just put your best face on and I guess buckle up. But yeah, I think it's pretty amazing. Yeah.
Nicely said. Graham?
I am in the same boat as Sean, really, and that's how my kind of heart thinks, if you like. My head, however, sort of looks at it a bit more dispassionately and sees a clamor for information from everybody who's concerned with this issue, whether whichever side they fall on, or even if they're like me, they're in the middle, and they have this kind of clamor for more people to come forward, and as soon as they do, they're all jumped on, for it's rubbish, or it's the best thing since sliced bread, so they can't win. Basically, if you come forward and say something, you're going to be pulled apart one way or another. But at the same time, everybody's saying, "Oh, we need more information." But my frustration lies in when people do come forward, it's never enough. There's not that categoric proof. There's not that kind of that smoking gun. There's not that kind of that silver bullet kind of thing that just go bang, and everybody wakes up and goes, this is definitely it. We're not there yet. So we're going to need a lot more people with a lot more information and stuff that we can tie up together, and stuff that isn't just somebody making a claim like what we've sort of been discussing here, which yes has a certain amount of kind of backstory to it, but it's not conclusive by any means. And I think everything just that we're getting it still has all these little holes in it, and we don't have anything that's so that's so well rounded and that you can't pick it apart. And I think until we get to that point, we'll still be searching for that information, and we'll still be having discussions like the one we've had tonight, and the ones that people are having, like round tables and the water cooler and all the rest of it around the world about the story that Sean's mentioned that his local sports reporters were talking about. Because I've heard people mentioning it as well, people who had never expected to talk about it, and yet they've not dismissed it, but they've actually just went, "Oh, it's interesting." But that's it. Whereas if it was something that was kind of categorically true and you could pin it down and say, right, there's no argument about this, then they wouldn't stop talking about it. It would be a new day. It would be a new chapter in Earth's history. But we're nowhere near that yet.
Right. Well, right now we're like, again, we're at that tipping point, right? Because the people, there are some people that, you're right, Graham, look at this and and think they can't get past the headline or the claim because whether it be the government or ourselves or however you want to frame it, it's been curated and made to be this way so that when the headlines do come out like this, you do think they're nuts, and a lot of people can't get past that headline to actually see like, wow, this guy is that. And he's saying this, so that's the kind of struggle we're up against too. And the one part of that radio show I didn't mention was the guy who is genuinely pissed about it. Like, this is a psyop. Like, they don't have any evidence. He was like pissed, like yelling, pissed at these guys.
I was going to say, to video that means something completely different.
This is like Twitter every day, all the time about UFOs right now on my sports talk radio show. Yeah, so it hits people in different ways. It's pretty interesting.
Yeah, and I look at it in two different ways. I do this every day, and I have these conversations privately with many people. We hear all sorts of rumors and talk behind the scenes, and there's that part of my conversation where I'm not expecting Sunday's interview to give us a massive disclosure, let's say, but I'm hoping it just continues to move the ball forward and with some credibility, and maybe then we get more whistleblowers and we just keep moving forward. I'm not expecting it all to change on Sunday, but then at the same time this week, I take my daughter to school every morning. I stand in a playground full of other people. Most of them are mums. And a few of them know what I do. And I've started getting WhatsApp messages from school mums with like, oh, look, the story made it into The Guardian and things like this. And I'm like, wow, this is crazy. And that really just makes me really happy. It puts a smile on my face. That's the other side of my life, that's just not to do with UFOs. And it's creeping in now. And that shows something about these people who I was like, oh, they're going to find out and they're going to think I'm crazy,
That's what I worry about. Yeah, too. So,
people surprise you when they come forward like that, don't they? Because I have people in some of the other circles I move in as well who come up and talk to me and say, again, the similar sort of thing. Have you seen this? Have you heard about this? And people who I never even knew were interested long term in the subject as well, who I would never have dreamt that was the case. So it's weird. What I would look forward to from Sunday is some idea of how he got this information about RS-33. Where did it come from? Or did it just come from, kind of Pinotti's research and stuff? Because if that's the case, then, it's going to be, right, well, you just kind of, you've found some information that's already out there. It hasn't come from somewhere else. Because if it came from somewhere else, that's a big deal to me, and that would actually blow the lid off this, and it would actually establish some proper credence to it. Whereas if it's a case of, that's where the information came from, then okay.
Yeah, because it's very easy to get excited about the chitter chatter that people are saying, oh, well, it's going to be good. Buckle up, everyone. And it's so easy to go, oh, God, this is going to be great. But, I think if you spend any decent amount of time in this subject, that it doesn't work like that. And
dial down your expectations, folks.
Rein it in. And that's not just like preparing for the worst. It's just real. Let's just be realistic. Come on.
He's this guy is no holds barred, dude. Like, he's coming out swinging, man, like talking about bodies and stuff. And maybe even, maybe he wasn't supposed to. I don't know what the story is behind that. It's kind of awkward, but he's talking about it, and it's what that I bring that up because this is one of those things where, like, if it's true, yes, freaking talk about it and let's go there, but if it's not, then it's like, why are you talking about bodies, dude?
Yeah. I think it's
going to be like that. It's going to be kind of explosive to a sense, I think.
I think it's been handled well across the board. Ross has obviously been sitting on this for a long time. Hats off to Ross. The way the whole debrief handled it, with the work that they did on their own independent verifications of Grush and all these things. So shout out Tim and the team. I think they did amazing. And everybody else that's sort of related to it and linked to it have been great. And, this new News Nation, the way that, people are saying, why are they just teasing it all the way up? But they're kind of, I think that's a good thing for people that may not know anything about this subject to kind of acclimatize them to it. So get their interest, pick it with these little short interviews. And I think it's great, personally.
what do you call that? Slow drip disclosure.
Slow
Yeah,
drip
maybe.
disclosure.
I think it's been good. I like the way it's been handled. It's leading up to it. Because if you just had one thing on one day, it's the next story the next week completely drowns it out. Let's keep it in people's minds a little bit more. So that's the way I look at it. So
good. Quick question for you. Once there's disclosure, are you going to change the name of your show?
Yeah, but I can't really call it post-disclosure team. I feel like a good friend Ryan might have something to say about that. Yeah, this is the thing, and I get asked that question all the time.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I really do. No, and it's a good question because whatever happens, I will still. It's not like I'm just going to go right, crack that one. What can we do next? Like,
exactly. And actually, if disclosure happens, we've got a whole load of other questions, haven't we? It's the case of how much out of the rich history and kind of reporting of UFOs is true,
right?
How much of it was actually made up?
Yeah, especially for like you, Graham. Yeah,
aren't they? So if your three-headed alien turns up on the White House lawn and he's speaking English and you can actually have a conversation with him, the first thing you're going to ask him is, "What happened to Roswell? What happened to Gettysburg?" All these other things.
Yeah.
And then
Graham's got to rewrite every book. Like...
I'd happily do it. If I had that chance to actually talk to a being, that could give me the answers.
Yeah, they can proofread it for you.
Yeah, but that's what you would do, wouldn't you? If you had suddenly could have those conversations with some other entity or intelligence or whatever, you'd be asking them, what in the record is true, because then you could build your history up, couldn't you? So that the Phantom airships, the ghost aeroplanes, the Foo Fighters, flying saucers, all the rest of it. You would ask those questions. So it wouldn't just be disclosure. All right, okay, as Vinny says, we'll move on to something else. It would just open up a whole new avenue of what's true and what isn't, and what about this and what about that. So we'd still have podcasts like this discussing a whole lot of other stuff, because you can bet your bottom dollar you wouldn't get all the answers in one go.
No, and you'd need people like historians like you, Graham. Like otherwise, people will be stuck like listening to people like we're on my sports talk show talking about this. Who the one guy was bringing up like, no, this is like Bob Lazar, where it's just not like Bob Lazar at all. Because of just many reasons. And I'm not saying that good or bad. I'm not doing that. I'm just saying it's completely different,
Yeah, absolutely.
So they're just going to need people who've
to interpret it all.
Yeah, and stay close to the truth,
Yeah,
Cool.
well, as we all do here, and everybody in the chat hopefully as well.
Yeah. But listen, just before we go, Graham, you mentioned Roswell there, and in like just over 2 weeks, me and you.
Oh my God, is that what it is?
It's something like 2.5 weeks. Me and you are heading out to Roswell. So
yeah.
Well, that's gonna be a blast.
It's gonna be a lot of fun.
It's a British invasion, isn't it, Vinny?
Especially now.
It is, yeah. It's just going to be awesome. I can't wait to be there. Some amazing names, people that I've spoken to on the show, and people I've never spoken to. Get to meet in person, which I love it, and I love all the attendees of these conferences. I just have a great time, and it's an excuse.
I want to work out what I'm going to talk to John Alexander about if I.
That's a big one.
It's going to be something I'm going to be a little bit in awe of, because it's going to be what do I talk to him about?
Yeah, so many questions.
Just to ask for the answer to
everything.
I'll
just shake him by the hand and say, it's lovely to meet you, and then go from there.
Just go from there.
Well, listen, guys.
No, you gotta have confidence. Do you know who I am, John? You know?
He's like, yeah, here's my jacket.
All these.
Take it away. Park my car.
So listen, guys, thank you so much for joining me tonight. I really, really do appreciate it. For everyone in the live chat, thank you guys as well. As always, I've had a really good audience tonight. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Go and follow Sean. Go and follow Graham. Buy Graham's books. They are absolutely amazing. Just two really good friends of the show. I'm going to be back next Thursday with Kevin Day for the first time. I've not spoken to Kevin on the show yet. So that's going to be a good one. So guys, please like, subscribe. If you want to go over to Patreon, patreon.com/disclosure team for the audio only for $1 a month. The support is so appreciated. I love you all. Take care, and we'll see you soon.
Bye.